Hello, and welcome to the session titled COVID-19, Clinical and Regulatory Considerations for Developing Treatments. My name is Beatrice Setnick, and I am the Chief Scientific Officer at Altasciences. Today, we will be discussing the development pathway for repurposing existing drug products for the treatment of COVID-19 to give our audience our perspective on the studies and timelines that are generally required for the development of such treatments. You may have heard about the already approved and marketed drugs that are currently being investigated to treat COVID-19, such as azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine, and remdesivir. We will review what is required to determine if such drugs are effective and safe for the treatment of COVID-19. This session is brought to you by Altasciences. Altasciences is a forward-thinking CRO offering a flexible approach to preclinical and clinical pharmacological studies, including formulation, manufacturing, and analytical services. Altasciences' full-service solutions covers the various phases of early drug development, including drug manufacturing, preclinical, clinical, regulatory, and bioanalytical services. I would now like to introduce you to my colleagues, Marie-Eve Cabana, Associate Director of Marketing Services, who will be leading our interview today, and Paul Sidney, Senior Director of Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, who will be providing input for regulatory considerations. Over to you, Marie-Eve.
So my first question is for Paul. What steps are regulatory agencies taking or putting in place in order to help the fight against the coronavirus?
Well, as you can imagine, this is a big event in the world globally, and the regulatory authorities are prioritizing their support to the industry to facilitate the availability of all forms of medical products, diagnostic kits, medical devices, therapeutics. We'll be focusing, Beatrice and I will be focusing on the COVID-19 therapies to address the pandemic. And I think the overarching relationship with the healthcare industry and the government is one of partnership and collaboration. You can see that demonstrated through the fact that they have dedicated resources to coordinate the direct support to the industry at all stages through the product therapy development. And internationally, they're actually collaborating amongst themselves, the health authorities, maintaining frequent and timely updates as this pandemic progresses. There are new thoughts and new insights, and so guidance documents are being published on a regular basis, letters to industry, webinars, product-specific correspondence. So quite a comprehensive support to the industry and to the world in fighting this pandemic. The regulatory guidance provides the industry, that's been provided to the industry is actually coordinated through two main groups internationally. One we all are well aware of, which is the World Health Organization. The other is the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, ICMRA. The ICMRA representatives have provided harmonized guidance for the development of vaccine therapies, and in doing so has assured that all the authorities around the world are working in harmony to accelerate the development of new therapies. Participants have shared various accelerated measures, and that's in fact what Beatrice and I will be discussing in greater detail, primarily to address some of the challenges of running clinical trials and preclinical assessments and designing common study protocols. They've highlighted opportunities to evaluate investigational agents or repurposed medicines, and that's something that we'll delve deeper into later in the discussion, specifically to take advantage of a regulation that's been promulgated years back through the FDA, the 505(b)(2) NDA approval process. This allows companies to repurpose existing therapies for new indications. And Beatrice will provide some examples that have already demonstrated some level of success. I'm sure some folks have already seen this within the press. In addition, there's processes that are in place that have been put into place through the emergency use authorization process. That's something that has been in place with the FDA, and they're springboarding that process as well. So not only existing drug development processes, but also emergency use authorization processes to further expedite the process. To continue on this mindset, there's evolving knowledge as well. And so to make sure that globally everyone is working in concert, there are bi-weekly meetings hosted by the ICMA representatives. And just to give you a sense of how important this is for all agencies, in fact, one of the meetings was hosted by the director of CEDAR, Dr. Janet Woodcock, who oversaw the specifics of that conference, one of the conferences. So overall, I think the take-home message that I'm trying to share is that there's an urgency, there's resources being marshaled to make sure that drug development is moving at the most expedient manner, and that it's coordinated with all of the agencies, and that they're partnering with industry.
Okay, well, you're mentioning expediency, which could bring me into my next question. So, how is the FDA and Health Canada facilitating expedient development of coronavirus therapies?
Well, as I led into the overall approach globally and some of the highlighted elements with the FDA, there are many guidances that are being published and specific notifications that are being published. We've maintained those lists internally at Altasciences to support our clinical trial programs, and I'm sure if anybody wishes to access them, we'd be more than happy to share those with you. But you can also obviously go to the websites that are posting and promulgating these information guidance documents on a furious pace. Actually, there's almost daily there's something new that's out there that's helping industry push things forward. In the case of Health Canada, there's been a notice that's been published specifically by the therapeutics group, committing to expedite the review of COVID-19 therapies, submissions, applications, and the review of these applications. In addition, there's a tool that the Canadian government has under the Health Ministry called the Interim Order, and they have issued an interim order that specifically expedites the approval, review, and interim approval for emergency use of in vitro diagnostics, such as serological and nucleic acid kits, which I'm sure you've seen in the press. The new drug submission approval process in the Food and Drug Act is also, as I shared with you, through the 505(b)(2), supporting an expedited process. Some of the other FDA tools that are being accessed include regular updates, as I said, on websites, developing guidance specifically for COVID-19 development, and various webinars as well that they're promulgating and giving more deep information. There's also daily roundups, which gives a sense of what I was trying to share in the fact that there are regular updates to support the industry. It's not simply one guidance and it's left static. As we can see in the press, it's an evolving aspect of learning more about the pandemic and the disease, and therefore there is a need for flexibility in these guidances, and the daily roundup briefings provide that kind of timely, immediate information. One of the more telling guidances that's proved to be very helpful for those that are conducting clinical trials is one that's been published in April 16th, 2020. The title of that is Conducting Clinical Trials During the COVID-19 Public Health Emergency. It's been presented in a webinar fashion as well to further instance the information that's been documented in that guidance document. And some of the key elements in that document that are worth taking note is basically how to manage the recruitment in the time of this pandemic, the challenges that are associated with that, accessing investigational product. As you can see, there's been challenges with supply chain, and so they've offered mitigation and management approaches should there be any investigational product supply chain issues. They've also provided some guidance on how to manage protocol deviations and amendments should there be any challenges due to the fact of social distancing or the protocols that have been put in place to manage the propagation of the COVID virus and how that may impact on a clinical trial. They've also talked about virtual clinical trial visits, self-administration of IP, of the investigational product at home. So that's a very good guidance document. And on-site monitoring of clinical trials, what their expectations are. They're exploring the idea of remote monitoring, which is something that's been talked about and is actually been detailed in this guidance to help proper management and collection of meaningful clinical trial data. So you can see that the flexibility in how the government is addressing the challenges of the pandemic and managing a effective clinical trial has been clearly delineated in the guidance document and provides some very helpful roadmap on how to manage a clinical trial. In fact, just to give you a sense of the prolific nature of the FDA, there's almost 40 guidance documents they've published to date, over 40 documents that have been published to date, which just gives you a sense of how busy and how collaborative and proactive, and also the amount of resource that they've dedicated to this important issue. There are other key programs, and I can get more directly, I provide more detail on those. One of them is called the CTAP program, and still another one that's specifically an offshoot of the international group that I was talking about, the ICMRA, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. That one's addressing how to best develop vaccine therapies and how to implement various guidance suggestions to expedite vaccine therapy development.
What is the CTAP program?
Yeah, sorry, I sort of led right into it. CTAP program it's actually an acronym. It stands for Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program. Sounds very fancy, but I think that's why they stuck with the acronym. But essentially, you'll see that the recurring terms here is fast track, acceleration, expedient, emergency use. It's all paving a path to make sure that the therapies, both treatment and preventative, are facilitated not only in the development and design of the trials, but also for the approval of the products as well. So some of the details on the CTAP, just to highlight, when they drafted this, there was in the order of around 72 active trials and 200 development programs for therapeutic agents, all for COVID-19. So the industry hasn't been caught sleeping either. They're actively developing products at a rate of knots. Mm-hmm. The process that was developed is a very well thought through management approach, and the first stage in the CTAP program is a triage. And essentially what that is the developer's requests are forwarded on to a specific FDA staff member whose specialty would be in that particular therapy or treatment modality for the disease, if it's a treatment rather than prevention, obviously. And then once that reviewer has gone through the documents, they're actually a resource for that company to refine their program, and they will have dialogues right up front. There's not the formal aspects to some respect of pre-IND meetings and so on. It's much more iterative and immediate. In fact, the second stage, just by its name, gives you a clear understanding of the speed. They call it ultra rapid input. That's out of the guidance. That's not me. And essentially what that process is to review the prioritized therapies that have come into the agency. They assess the scientific merit, and then they will push that forward if it has obvious and clear scientific merit for progress, and they will offer to review the protocol associated with that drug within a 24-hour submission time frame, which is extraordinary, which gives you a clear example of the commitment and resource they've allocated. A complete review of a single patient is also being offered as well if it's a compassionate administration of the product, and they will review the results of that therapy within a 3-hour time frame. They committed, as you can see by virtue of me walking through some of these initiatives, that they're working very closely with the applicants all throughout the whole process to assure that the quality component, the safety and efficacy component are all appropriate. And in fact, they will even assist if there's any limited problems of manufacturing to transfer the manufacturing to another site, which is, once again, still another example of their commitment. So currently there's, as of April 16th, they have in the order of 950 inquiries. I'm sure that's even a greater number at the date that we're presenting right now.
Wow.
So that gives you a sense of it. I would just like to close that's the CTAP program. The EMEA also has something that actually was just published yesterday. So it just gives you a sense of what I was sharing, that it's just happening on a regular basis. As of a day before this particular webinar was recorded, they've developed something called the Fast Track Program, which is almost identical to the FDA program. So I won't go in detail on that, but it also demonstrates the fact that it's so similar to the FDA. It also demonstrates the fact that the ICMA group that I was talking about, where there's global sharing, is really getting traction because they obviously are sharing their ideas. Some of the maybe unique aspects of the EMA review process is they introduce something called a rolling review, which is essentially to look at the data as a trial progresses rather than waiting for a one done and submit. Essentially, this rolling review will collect data as the trials progress, and they commit to a two-week turnaround so that there's a development of knowledge going forward. And they anticipate with that methodology to dramatically decrease the time of approval onto market. So all of this is really exciting stuff, and I know I was sort of, tabling all this stuff in a very methodical way, but I think it's in my opinion useful information, and it's just really giving a roadmap for folks to go on to the various websites and keep hunting for these guidance documents, and just be heartened to the fact that it is truly hand in hand working to find a therapy, both private and government.
Mm-hmm. So my next question would be for Beatrice. So we're seeing, everybody joining in against coronavirus and finding a treatment, and we're seeing a lot of companies repurposing drugs. So it would be good, I think, to know what the required studies are in order to gain approval for a repurposed drug.
Mm-hmm. So when you're repurposing a drug, you're taking a drug that's already marketed but being used for another therapy or another reason or purpose or target indication, as they call it, and you're reusing it or testing it out in a new condition. In this case, it would be COVID-19. Now, in this situation, because the drug is already marketed and approved, the regulatory agencies, the pharmaceutical company or whoever has submitted the information for approval for the drug, has already conducted much of the experimentation. So this allows for a certain degree of fast tracking in terms of the numbers of studies that are required. So usually you'll do a comparative study of your new formulation of the drug compared to the existing marketed formulation to see if the release is similar. And the number of studies will really depend on the data that's available for the marketed drug. So for example, for COVID-19, the drug will be potentially used in various age groups, various population types, some patients that may already have pre-existing conditions, and in some cases, safety data may not exist in those populations. So it has to be carefully reviewed to see where there may be some data gaps in terms of safety. Now, certainly when you are repurposing a drug for a new therapy like COVID-19, you would need to do efficacy studies to show that it is effective in the treatment of COVID-19, in which case these are called phase 2, phase 3 trials. So you would probably test in a smaller group of patients to pressure test to see if the drug is effective, and if so, you would move into a larger phase 3 trials, and you require 2 efficacy studies to establish data sufficient to establish that there is an effective therapy on hand. So these are usually trials that are requiring patients in the several hundreds to thousands. And the time for that development work probably is about, realistically, easily 2 to 3 years, because the phase 3 patient trials, because of the volume of patients that you need to test, take a little bit longer. So you're looking at the time that you need to take to initiate the study, to the collection of data. So then you submit your data and then have regulatory approval before it can hit the market. And that in itself takes several months, but now under the pandemic, regulatory agencies are expediting and fast-tracking reviews for potential COVID-19. So this helps to shorten the timeline. But it realistically can take even up to several years to get something moved through that kind of program, depending on how quickly the recruitment of patients are and how quickly those phase 3 efficacy studies can go.
And these drugs are approved drugs already when we're repurposing them?
Yes. And they do require further testing because although we know the safety, we're not sure, depending on the type of drug it is. For example, the existing marketed drug may not have, for example, safety data in children, for example. So you may need to do a test in children to see if it's safe and at what doses you would need to do. So if a drug is treating a different type of an infection or a different type of virus, you may actually need to adjust the doses that that are effective for treating COVID. And when you do that, they either may be much higher than what's tested or they may be lower. But if they go higher, then you need to do some additional safety testing. You may have to look at different populations. But just because a drug is approved and marketed doesn't mean that it's safe and effective for different indications. And so you have to be very careful because oftentimes drugs can have different interactions with other drugs. They may be contraindicated for other conditions, or they may have safety concerns for vulnerable populations, like, for example, for someone who has some cardiac issues or hepatic or renal impairments. So whatever safety data isn't sufficient for that treatment of the new target, in this case, COVID-19, that would require further testing, even though they may be already marketed drugs. So there may be potential important safety data that's missing, and certainly we need to know if these drugs are effective. You don't want to impose or bring out drugs that may potentially be harmful in certain populations or that don't work well for COVID-19, because it would give, if it's not effective, then people aren't getting the treatment and they may be getting side effects. So you certainly don't want situations like that. You want to bring on drugs on board that you can test and know with reasonable certainty that they will be effective in the condition that you're trying to treat.
Okay. And would it be, I guess it would be important to know the application process between 505(b)(2) and generic drugs?
Yeah, so many people get the two confused oftentimes if they're not familiar with the regulatory process. So a generic application is also an application for an already marketed drug. But in the case of a generic application, you're essentially creating a copy of an existing drug and you're using it for the same purposes. So for example, if you have a drug to treat pain, you would create a generic drug to treat pain at virtually the same doses. So in those cases, those are very easy, relatively straightforward applications, because you're really just making sure that your drug is released in the same way that the marketed drug is. It has the same bioequivalency, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not using it for a different indication. When you have a 505(b)(2) application, it's when you take an existing marketing drug, but you're doing something different to it. You may be turning it into an extended release formulation. You may be changing the formulation. You may be changing the route of administration. You may be changing the target population. So you're doing something different that requires a bit more evaluation from either a safety and an efficacy perspective. So it is a little bit more involved, but it's certainly a lot faster than if you were to go from the beginning of drug discovery. So if you're going to do de novo research for a brand new drug to treat COVID-19, generally novel pathways require about 10 years, just to give you a frame of reference, because you virtually have to test at all different aspects. You need preclinical data to ensure that it's safe before you can go into human trials, and then you need extensive clinical trials in various populations at various doses to establish the safety of the drug. So those are the very longest new chemical entity applications. So certainly with repurposing existing drugs, it allows for a expedited application from the forefront because of the ability to support it with the comparator drug that's already marketed.
Yeah, as Beatrice is saying, I mean that you have all this published safety data that is available and that is likely, in some cases, still valid. There may be areas where you would have to amplify that information depending on its intended indication, but there is background safety data, core data, and so that would really cut into the development time. So it's a really great way of expediting the process.
Exactly, and certainly when there's published data on a drug, even if a marketed drug is not filed in a certain country, so for example, COVID-19 is a global pandemic, so it would benefit if a new therapy came out, it would be beneficial for global use. Other countries can rely on data that's been collected, even if a drug hasn't been approved, if there are publications and other data sources to help support the regulatory submissions in other countries. And I'm sure, and Paul may be able to comment on the kind of more of the global efforts of how people may synchronize consistent drug approvals in different countries. If a promising therapy for COVID-19 emerges, I'm sure there'll be a lot of collaborations between our regulatory agencies across the globe to bring those to the forefront for use in their respective countries.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's exactly the purpose of that ICNRA group, and the regulatory authorities are actually tracking all the therapies real time, and they're actually using existing, for instance, some trials are using real world evidence data trials, and they're accessing the database, and all the health authorities are monitoring it, and I'm quite confident are discussing it real time, as you can see by the very proactive nature of some of the agencies within their own countries. So, yeah.
And I think it's important that we also go into a little bit more detailed timelines regarding these repurposing of drugs. So I'm wondering if we can go in a little more detail about that. So what would you be able to elaborate a little on the estimated time frame for this type of testing?
Well, like I mentioned, if you're doing a drug de novo, it could take well into a decade, if not longer, if you're developing a brand new chemical that's not been tested or marketed. So those are the longest periods of time required for drug approval. But when you're taking an existing marketed drug, there will be a handful of studies that will need to be conducted. For example, you'll need to compare it to the existing formulation. So your new formulation that you're developing, you'll probably do some kind of a bioequivalency to make sure that your formulation is releasing the way it's supposed to, that the drug is released and results in the same blood concentrations of that drug. You would also have to take a look at the existing safety information, and this will vary from drug to drug. So, for example, like I gave an earlier example, if, for example, we know that a lot of elderly patients are affected by COVID-19. So, for example, if a drug hadn't been thoroughly tested in the elderly population, it may require additional preliminary work just to make sure that it's safe in that population before you started to go into very large trials involving elderly patients. So first you have to see what the drug is being intended for. In the case of COVID-19, because it's such a widespread virus that really affects all ages and demographics, you need to consider that for safety. And so I think the initial thing would be to do a data gap analysis to see if there are additional preliminary trials, phase 1 trials that usually take about 20 to 30 patients. It can be upwards of 60 patients, but these would look at any special populations that you'd have to look at safety, which may or may not be needed depending on the drug. But what would be needed, you'd need to take a look at the dosing. So you need to characterize, and this is usually done in a phase 2 trial. These are smaller patient studies where you're now taking, it could be anywhere to approximately 80 to a few hundred patients, and you're testing different doses to see what dose is responsive in COVID-19. And if you're looking, and these are usually preliminary studies, which will tell you, is there a signal to show that the drug is working in this condition? And if so, what doses do you need to explore? And the doses could be variable because people have different metabolism, they have different body weights, so there's oftentimes an adjustment needed. But this allows you to gauge what may be effective in for the treatment of COVID-19. And then once you have your sort of doses configured and safety in that population established, some preliminary looks at showing efficacy, you can roll that into a phase 3 trial. So when you're trying to expedite it, you may have a preliminary stage where you look at that and then you continue into a larger trial. So there's a way of expediting these clinical studies so that you're not having to start and restart new trials, but rather get very creative in terms of combining trials to reduce timelines. But essentially, efficacy requires some time to do because these are large trials. They're typically several hundred, sometimes even into the thousands of patients. You need enough patients to be able to support a endpoint showing that it's effective for the condition being treated. Now, with agencies, typically in drug development, they ask for 2 efficacy studies. When you have pandemics like this, a single study may be sufficient. So it really depends on how the regulatory agents respond. But I would estimate realistically, it could take about 2 to 3 years to bring something to market, potentially sooner if they have a lot of already really good safety data for a given marketed drug. But it does take some time to get several hundreds of patients into a trial, enrolled, tested, and have an appropriate follow-up period to make sure that, for example, the COVID-19 has resolved and that the drug was effective. So you have to treat. Usually these types of treatments will be acute treatment while they're perhaps in a hospital setting. But then you do need some time for follow-up to make sure that the symptoms have appropriately resolved and what the long-term side effects, if any, may be of a drug. So yeah, it does take time. It really will depend on the type of drug as well and the safety profile of the drug. So I estimate, there's been optimistic views that we may be able to get something within about a year, but I think the reality is it may take longer. And you have to also remember that because a drug is being brought into a clinical trial doesn't mean it's going to be successful. As we know, as drug developers working on clinical trials all the time, unfortunately, many of them are not effective, or there are other issues that eventually wean them out of the drug development process. So we're certainly optimistic for therapies, but it may take time, and it may take time before a safe and effective medication is approved.
And would you say that it's the same process if we're looking at combining drugs in terms of a treatment?
It is. It's the same idea, because currently there are no COVID-19 therapies. So anything you're trying with existing drugs, whether you're looking at a single drug or whether you're looking at combining them, you still need to look at whether that combination is safe and effective in treatment. It's a little bit more complex when you're combining drugs, because then you have an increased chance of interaction with other drugs that patients may be on. So you may have other safety concerns to think about, especially if those drugs have not been combined before. So there actually may be more safety data required in such cases, depending on whether or not those drugs are normally given together or not. But it's the same approach. You would still need to establish the safety and to show that it is effective in treatment of COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, that's, Beatrice has articulated really well. And basically, the science is the science. What I've provided you is how the government is doing everything they can to, I guess, for want of a better term, decrease the white space, the administrative white space sometimes, between waiting for an answer and finalizing the design of a protocol and gaining actually knowledge from the government, because they may have an insight on that therapy that could be shared with the industry. So that kind of acceleration is there. But at the end of the day, a clinical trial is there to ensure the safety of population that's receiving the medication, and in fact it truly is efficacious. So you have to follow science,
Exactly.
And I get my next question could be for Paul. So we have at Altasciences, we have clinical sites in the United States as well as in Canada. So I'm wondering if there would be any specific considerations for running these trials in either the U.S. or in Canada.
Well, I mean, generally, just in broad terms, I thought through, your question, and I'm thinking honestly, in the COVID-19 space, and that's what we're focusing this on. There isn't much difference between, because it is a global effort. There is guidances out there that are shared, and I just to reiterate what I had commented on earlier, I think some of the main things is dealing with how you manage trial recruitment, managing IP supply, patient monitoring, alternate methods for safety assessments, if need be, if there's site visit problems and challenges because of the pandemic, screening challenges, interaction with the IRB should be proactive, and changes are prioritized within your IRB for these COVID therapies. But all of this is underlined within the guidance, and I think if you follow the GCPs, you document what you're doing, and you keep current with the guidances that are published, I think you'll be fine in either country in running these COVID 505 studies.
And with the, sorry, Beatrice, did you have something to add?
No, I echo Paul's comments. I mean, both U.S. and Canada conduct studies under ICH guidelines. Usually when you have phase 3 studies, it probably would be of interest to go beyond just a single country and diversify it, because any kind of treatment for COVID-19 really will be meant for global use, because of the global nature of the pandemic, and ensuring that you have a diversity represented in the clinical trials is going to be important. Different ethnicities, races, gender, age ranges, all of that's very important, and oftentimes that's accomplished if most phase 3 type trials oftentimes are multi-country trials, because they want to consider the different genetic variations across our global population.
Exactly, right. Thank you.
And so looking at the global aspect then, if my coronavirus therapy does qualify for a 505(b)(2) submission, can foreign data be used towards this submission?
Yes, actually, and that's built directly into U.S. law, actually. Just to do my regulatory thing here, I'll cite a regulation. The Part 312.120 actually stipulates that foreign study data can be used to support a market application, and in fact, these studies can be developed outside and supporting the definitive application without an IND approval within the U.S. They will accept clinical trials and the safety and efficacy data that's been developed from foreign institutions and foreign clinical trials and to support a market authorization. And that's also stipulated within the regulations 314.106. Essentially, the key to this is that you follow ICH guidance, which is international standard. You follow the good clinical practice approach, which is international standard. And in fact, it will be accepted by the FDA.
So Beatrice, my next question, can repurposed drugs be used off-label?
So I mean, there is certainly a degree of off-label use that's used in clinical practice, and sometimes it's medically guided. So if a disease or something life-threatening may be required for treatment, oftentimes doctors will make medical judgment to see if an existing therapy that may not necessarily be indicated will be effective. So that can be used under medical emergencies. Generally, off-label use for a wider spread condition where you're trying to claim it to be effective in a condition has to be studied. And it's reasonable that that's the case, because anything that's going to be used on such a wide scale, and thinking about COVID-19, how many millions are affected by it, just going off and allowing free range off-label use could be very dangerous, because we may not know what the repercussions would be from a safety standpoint in a large scale of subjects, and whether or not it would be effective. So certainly you don't want to give a drug and then perhaps not try an alternate therapy that may have been more effective, or another course of medication or introduce some kind of side effect that may worsen the condition than actually help it. So it's while there can be off-label use for something that you require to determine if something is effective for a indication or a problem like COVID-19, it really does need testing. And the testing is there for everyone's safety and benefit. So it is, and that's the whole reason why we have drug approvals, is to protect the public, to ensure that what they're getting is safe and works.
And Paul, is there an advantage? So our head office here at Altasciences is in Canada. So I'm wondering if there is an advantage to running the trial in Canada against the 505(b)(2) submission.
There is in some respects, because the CTA process is, unlike the IND, which is an IND process is developed to provide safety and efficacy for the complete preclinical the clinical program, the phase 1, 2, and 3, multiple clinical trials, whereas the CTA process is developed per clinical trial submission. And so what that offers is, a smaller burden as far as developing safety data for a given phase of the trial. You're trying to develop a knowledge of the safety within a narrower scope, and that facilitates, in fact, a flexibility in the development of the drug. And the timing of the studies. It also is a little less burdensome because you're focusing your feedback on that given trial, whereas in an IND situation, you're having to provide regular updates for all the ongoing clinical trials. So, in some respects, there is, that advantage of flexibility and speed of moving forward into first in human. I think also, as I've mentioned, the FDA does accept the trials of foreign studies, and Health Canada is certainly one that works collaboratively with the FDA. It has a strong international relationship globally. It works and is an active member in ICH and the PIC group, and has various formal information sharing with all the main agencies, both EMA, FDA, and so on. So that approach and what's expected of Health Canada would be consistent with what the FDA would want, but in a more flexible and specific manner. The timing of approval of a CTA is similar to the IND, so you're not decreasing the flexibility there. You'll file and get a 30-day approval timeframe committed by the agency, Health Canada. And there's a long history of working with health professionals, institutions, and in fact, there are thousands of trials run in Canada. So I think there is, to some extent, an advantage.
And we mentioned, Paul, you mentioned ICMRA at the beginning of our discussion today. So I was wondering if we can just go back to that and see how is ICMRA facilitating vaccine therapy development?
Yeah, so that's one of the first publications they made with respect to supporting the industry. It was published March 18th, 2020. And FDA and EMA drafted minutes of the global meeting and essentially provided a guidance to the industry as to the data requirements for developing a vaccine therapy. Essentially looking at vaccine therapies, not unlike what we were describing with the 505(b)(2) in the fact that you're looking for commonality of existing vaccines. So they're looking to see and have presented it in the guidance that if the construct and the manufacturing process and methodology is comparable, they're proposing that you would be able to access some of the existing preclinical safety data for other vaccines to map against developing vaccines. And they'll obviously look at that with the industry, confirm its similarity, that it is a well-characterized vaccine, that it clearly maps against an existing one, and then you may be able to diminish the amount of preclinical work that you have to do to bring it into the clinical trial aspect. So I think that's one of the biggest take-homes from the ICMRA and the vaccine therapies, and how they're pushing previous knowledge to drive forward, previous safety knowledge to drive forward clinical assessment.
Mm-hmm. And for vaccines, certainly safety becomes a very important issue, because vaccines are intended for an otherwise healthy population to prevent COVID-19 infection, whereas what we were talking about earlier, the therapies are intended for the patients that already have COVID-19. So when you're looking at a vaccine, knowing that you'd be giving it to otherwise healthy children and vulnerable populations that are that may not have COVID-19, there are safety considerations that have to be carefully managed to ensure that you have something that works well and is safe.
And to close off our discussion today, I was wondering if you would have any final thoughts for our listeners today.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what I would like to say is that I hope sincerely that we have some additional treatments to put into our toolbox for the fight against COVID-19 soon. And although I know that first and foremost, speed is of utmost importance, the importance of safety and efficacy are even more so important, because we need to understand and fully take accountability for whatever is brought to market for treatment of COVID-19. And it is no art to bring in something that will cause further problems or safety issues. So there are many, many great minds across the world working on the solutions for COVID-19. And while it is integral to get these out quickly to mitigate the potential downside of COVID-19 and the health effects it has on people globally, I'm sure that with time and with diligent scientific research, although expedited and perhaps creatively done in ways to shorten the timelines, the integrity of the science has to be there. And I know that our company has been involved in some aspects, and I know that there are a lot of very talented researchers out there globally putting their heads together to come up with a vaccine. So I wish that everyone stays safe, and I hope that we all ride through this pandemic as safely as possible and have vaccines and medications that are not only developed for COVID-19, but that can help us in the future to prevent such pandemics from occurring in the first place, because it's not only mitigating this one, but hopefully preventing future ones.
Yeah, I can't add anything more. Thank you, Beatrice. Is well put. I just echo everything you've said, and to just say that it's really heartening to see the partnership and collaboration throughout across the world and the fight against this pandemic. So I concur with Beatrice.
And I'd like to thank you, Beatrice and Paul, for your time today. This very interesting conversation about COVID-19 clinical and regulatory considerations for developing treatments. And thank you to our listeners to this discussion today. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.